All right, man, I got a random thought for you. This is something that crossed my mind this week, and you're going to probably find yourself wondering, what the hell's wrong with this guy? So I find myself all the time, I don't know if you're like this, but I hear certain phrases and certain sayings a lot, and it makes me want to go find out where the hell the phrase came from, right? So so it's funny, full disclosure, it's a big topic in my household because my lovely wife mixes up phrases like the day is long. Like, I mean, we'll literally start one phrase and end another one and somehow combine them. And I'm like, where did that come from? So it's really, really funny. It's very hilarious and completely adorable. But this week I found myself wondering where a certain phrase that we use literally all the time came from. You know what that phrase is? It's eating your own dog food. So do you know where that phrase comes from?
I'm going to venture a guess, but I'm going to get this wrong.
Okay, yeah, tell me.
Most of the really weird phrases like that I usually hear usually come from presidential elections. It's like get the ball rolling, like crap like that. But I know I'm wrong on this. Where does it actually come from?
Well, that's a pretty good guess. That's an educated guess. That was actually way better than my initial thought. Was like, oh yeah, okay, this has got to be something real simple and easy. So it came from Microsoft in the 80s.
Okay.
Now this fact is a little bit debated. So obviously this is, we call this, other shows we listen to call this half-ass internet research. That's what this is. So they were actually referencing their software companies to use their own internally generated tools when they're developing. So the gist of it is that a dog food is of that high quality that it's advertised to consumers, then it should be good enough that a person can eat it as well. So I just thought that was so funny that what a phrase that, I mean, they just decided to eat their own dog food in the Microsoft days.
This is terrible. I shouldn't admit this, but there is literally some new treats downstairs for my dogs.
Don't say it.
And no, I haven't actually yet, but I didn't realize cause for those of you that don't know me, I have 2 dogs and I have a child. Now, sometimes the way those snacks look sitting on the counter, I mean, the packaging was beautiful. I was like, oh, this is something Lane brought in. And so it's going to be, and I was this close. And then I kind of looked at it. I was like, oh, it's dog food. So yeah, anyways, what are we talking about?
You're like, where the hell did that come from? I swear there's a reason I thought
beautiful.
of that.
It's beautiful.
I thought of that because today we're going to actually talk about why we're doing what we're doing, why we feel like podcasting is seriously the ultimate marketing tool.
I love it because it's like, I've been doing podcasting for a long time, but we finally were just like, all of the data says it's time to get serious with this. And so why is that something that we're like, okay, let's not just do one podcast a week. Let's get silly with it. And so let's talk about it. Let's dive in. Let's do it.
So obviously I want to talk about, I mean, we've talked about this a lot recently and how podcasting has really morphed into this, I mean, good grief, this giant over time. It's become such an insanely huge medium, but it's also at the same time become a really, really good marketing tool. And it leads me to the reason that I wanted to make sure to ask you some things here today, because I want to figure out why we're eating our own dog food just by recording this podcast. And, that's not where it ends. There's so much more to get into. So, I mean, let's just start at the beginning. So talk about, I mean, where were you first? Because I'm still trying to remember the first time I listened to a podcast. I don't even know, but where were you first introduced to podcasts?
This is like 2012, 2013 that like people in the digital marketing space start talking about podcast. And, I'm like, okay, what's a podcast? And then somebody sent me one and I can't even remember which pod the first one that I listened to was, but somebody sent me one and I was like, oh, so it's AM radio? Like
that's true. Yeah.
I mean, it's basically what we would think of as AM radio, which is like really episodic type of content or social commentary. And I was like, this is basically convenient AM radio, except for the problem is it wasn't that convenient at the time. Like I was like, cool, but like, how do I listen to a podcast again? Like it was a whole journey trying to get to the podcast. Once I did it, it was a great experience, but I was like, this is not easy. And then like a couple years later, we start seeing Apple really, really buy into this. And so, the iPhone comes out several years back, obviously at this point. We're way down the road with that. But the iPhone comes out, and the strategy behind the iPhone, really got into, okay, we're going to build this world that you can hold in the palm of your hand. Not only can you browse the internet, but we're going to build this, this app area. One of the apps that they really invested hard in, because they saw this is a huge potential for us to actually corner a market and be a device that people consume a certain kind of content on, is podcast. And so Apple got really, really deep into podcast. And, that was like sort of the first hardcore thing. And so when I really started, being like, oh, this is a thing, is when not only did I can't remember the year, but not only was Apple doing, the podcast app and things like that, but they were very much charting popularity of podcast. And so this is when I got really interested in podcast, and I did an experiment. And I don't talk about this experiment a lot, but I did this experiment. And at the time, there's like some really, really big podcasters out there that are doing some cool things. Podcasters that we know today, like Joe Rogan, Pat Flynn, like people that have been doing this thing for a very, very long time that I've enjoyed. And I was like, let's do an experiment. So we had a podcast. We threw a podcast up. We did the first few episodes. And getting back to why we build lists, I had this list that I'd been building with customers for a while. And I tell my customers, I started a podcast. It's a new thing. I know you know about podcasts, but like, here's how you go listen. And I literally built a page, Marshall, where we were like walking them through the step by step of how to find the podcast, if they wanted to leave a review, how that worked. Yeah. And so we sent these folks this, and this is one of those dirty pool things. And forgive me, Apple. But I told my people, if you leave a review, we'll send you a bonus. And I didn't tell them leave a good review. I just said leave a review of the actual podcast, sure, and we'll give you something for free on the back end if you can like send me a picture of the review that you sent. Yeah. And so I thought this would be a cool way to try to climb up the podcast charts. I didn't realize how well it was actually going to work. And at the time, you could do this. You can't do this anymore because there's way too many people, podcasts, way too much competition, and there's way too many people listening. So it's a much bigger thing. But we were literally in the top 3 podcasts in the world for a weekend. And I remember when I passed Joe Rogan, because Joe Rogan was a big deal even back then. Not sure, like today. Like today, it's the whole thing. But I remember when we passed Joe Rogan, and I was like, oh, this is a lot of visibility. I started getting phone calls from people. And they were like, hey, do you want to do this deal? Do you want to, like, people actually hitting me up privately for opportunities? And I guess what hit me at that point was like, oh, this is a outlet to a world that you can get, if your content's good and you have people listening to it, you can get places very, very quickly. Now, as things started to evolve, it got harder and harder to do those kinds of things. You can't pull that off in the same way anymore. But the utility of podcasts, and this is what I think is the topic of our discussion, or a big topic of our discussion today, the utility of podcasts is actually much bigger than having a charting podcast. You don't have to be on the charts anywhere for a podcast to be extremely valuable. And I know that we're going to cover a lot of that today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I, me, I like to dig into the past and figure out the journey of how you got here, and even kind of what, your own personal habits. So tell me about, like, do you have some podcasts right now that you find yourself listening to all the time? And then also, like, how have your habits from a podcast listening-ship standpoint changed over time, and the space, because of your knowledge of the space? How do you kind of navigate the whole world? Because you're right. It is a thick market now.
Yeah. One of the cool things, is, I travel a lot these days, and podcasts are sort of my go-to choice for when I'm traveling, because I don't have to sit and watch something, which is nice. But in terms of my go-to podcast, from a perspective, like a business side, I'm really, really big into How I Built This with Guy Raz. Like, amazing podcast about entrepreneurs, businesses, how they built what they built, and sort of the movements that were behind those things. Smart Passive Income with Pat Flynn. Pat is a pioneer in podcasting and the mechanics of how to grow a podcast. And so just if you're into, if you're into entrepreneurship, especially digital entrepreneurship, Pat Flynn is a cat that you want to actually, go after and listen to, because there's a lot of really, really good things on that podcast. Now, from there, I get into a lot of just like, hey, when I need to step away from business for a little while, what am I after? And like, I really go towards a couple of like just try and true ones for me. The Always Sunny podcast, because I've always looked at the Always Sunny guys as entrepreneurs because I know how their show started. It was very much an interesting way they started, but like it's a terrible, terrible show about the worst people in the world. The creators will tell you this, but the podcast is very funny because the podcast is designed to be a behind the scenes of each episode as the show goes, and it almost never does that. They're almost never talking about the actual episode. They do a little bit, but it's mostly like behind the scenes of, just fun stuff in their lives. And it's just interesting to get behind the scenes of those guys. Another one is Smartless. Smartless is absolutely amazing. I won't ruin it for anybody, but like it is, think about three people that are extremely famous that you didn't know were friends that are doing a podcast together, and they are the worst interviewers in the world. Like just the worst interviewers. They bring on celebrities to interview them. And the idea is one of them brings on a celebrity. The other two don't know who it is. The other two try to guess who the celebrity is before they get there. And then they interview the celebrity. It's always the worst interview that you've ever heard in terms of questions that they ask, but somehow it ends up being the best entertainment wise. And so love those podcasts. Those are some of the things that, what podcasts do you listen to, man? Like what are your core things?
Yeah, I'm big on Smartless. I love that. My wife will drag me into the occasional crime drama. So there's a lot of like Dateline that happens, which some of those I always act like I'm not into them, and then 10 minutes in, I'm fully enthralled and trying to figure out if I can close the case myself. So that goes on a lot. I also love, I'm a sports nut, so I love to get on those ESPN 30 for 30s because I think they're always so informational and so good and well put together and stuff like that. But those are all from a just kind of, but I've also, the name's failing me right now. You might know it because I think our team kind of focused in on him, but I think his name is Tim Ferriss. Does that sound right?
Oh yeah. Good old Tim Ferriss.
Yeah. Yeah. And just shows like that are very, I don't know. I consider them positive in nature because I find myself listening to those and they can be inspiring. I can pull like, personal nuggets. I can pull professional nuggets and stuff like that. But it's funny. That's just kind of the world that it is. It's such a media frenzy. There's so much out there that you find yourself trying to just get attached to something that it kind of clicks with you.
Well, and I think the interesting thing about all of those podcasts that we talked about, and shout out to Bill Simmons,
Oh yeah, how do we not mention the Ringer, the whole network?
But the Ringer network and is also Wondery. Anything by Wondery is amazing. The thing that's interesting about these particular podcasts that we just mentioned is they give you, just like episodic TV stuff, they give you something to look forward to every week. And it's very much on a regular basis. It's very much you can expect that it's coming out. And it sort of gives you something that, like, even with the drudgery of anything that you've got to put up with your day to day, it gives you something that you can lock into. And that's what people are looking into. And I think the thing that I really want to like put out there is, while the content is always the anchor of these podcasts, it's very much the host of the podcast giving you a look into how, like, the access they have to the world they have. And this is where I think a lot of people don't understand when they think about podcasts. They're like, oh, I want to see this person's life, or I'm interested in sports. No, you're interested into the access that the host has, or the host, or the group of hosts has to that world. That's and right. So the reason I listen to Bill Simmons is Bill Simmons has all this access that I don't have to this. I can watch a game just like Bill Simmons. I analyze things, and I think my takes are far more genius than Bill Simmons. But I realize that Bill Simmons has more access than me, so he is definitely more knowledgeable. So that's why I listen. And everything that I listen to, it's really about what is the window into the world that this particular person can provide that I don't see. And the beautiful thing about this, even if you're just starting out and you don't feel like you've got a lot of access to anything, your take on a world is fascinating to someone. And that's the thing that I think is really core when I think about everyone we just mentioned, no matter if it was business, no matter if it was entrepreneurial, like, or it was just entertainment. That person has a unique window into the world, and that's why we listen to them. So taking that into sort of this next part, that's definitely something we got to talk about.
No, absolutely. And you segued it perfectly, because every single one of those podcasts that we listen to and everyone that exists from a certain extent is there to sell you something, essentially. They're there trying to market something to you. So at what point, along this journey of podcasting for you, did it click for you to go, hey, this is how I can use a podcast to actually work within my business and actually market my business for me? So was there a specific moment, or has it been kind of like a gradual thing?
There was a specific moment where I realized something super important. We talk about your window into a world. Yep. Okay. Everybody listening to this was like, well, I don't have a window. I'm just starting out. But that's the thing. That's the very meta thing about what we're talking about is every single person out there that's an expert on something or that is known for something loves to be interviewed. And so just by having a podcast and putting it together a certain way gives you a window that you didn't have the day before. And that's what's so interesting is people will come on your podcast. Famous people will come into your podcast. They will be interviewed by you because you're giving them a platform. And that's the thing. Everybody likes to be positioned as the expert, even if they've already been positioned as the expert for a long period of time. So I just remember one day realizing that, we've got a pretty good listenership here. We got a pretty good base, but even if we didn't have a base, we'd be doing podcasts just for the connections with the people that we interview. And that's the thing. When you do one of these podcasts, people will come on to be interviewed, to be positioned as the expert. But once it's done and the episode's published, those people actually share the podcast that they did with their audience that they already have. And so the big aha moment for me was I can get guests and people that would never talk to me before to come talk to me for 15, 20, 30 minutes, an hour. And then not only is that powerful that I'm going to publish that out, but they will expose me to their existing audience. And it's a way that if you're consistent, and that's the big key here, if you're consistent with this is something that is very hard not to grow into something. Now, you may not grow into somebody that has a podcast that's charting on the iTunes charts, but that should absolutely never be the goal these days. That's nice if it happens.
Sure.
The goal is what are the connections that you can make with this medium? And the very, very cool part is if you've got a computer and you've got a microphone that can hook up to that computer, that's all you really need to get this going. We do this video thing, man, but not everybody you don't need the video for this thing to be very, very big. It's literally a computer and a microphone and something we use Riverside .fm to record our podcast. And it's a very, very good thing for us. But there's tons of different things that you can use and put together, and you can very cheaply put together a podcast that gives you access to people that you would never have access to if you didn't have that podcast. And those things can very quickly turn into opportunity. And I remember it was just one day I was like, oh, that's what this is.
Right.
Okay. I got it.
Yeah. And you hit the nail on the head there too. I think there's a, I don't know, thought out there that, not everyone can do this. Well, bullshit. Yeah, they can. Everyone can do this. It comes down to, whether you have something that you do essentially want to get out into the world from a message standpoint. So, we talk about obviously podcasting being one of our major tools for marketing, but obviously, and you touched on the fact that you need a computer, you need a camera, some basic tools. But what are some tools that you're using right now that are helping kind of put your podcast to work for you from a marketing standpoint? Because I know that you're obviously using tools to make them happen, but then you're trying to direct people to tools in that exist in your marketing space. So talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So I'll just break down kind of from top to bottom the things that we use. I'm sitting here right now and I am on a Mac. Doesn't matter though that you can have a Mac, you can have a PC, does not matter. All I'm really doing here is I've got this is a Shure MV7 that I'm using, and the mic is not a huge thing either. I've used a Blue Yeti. I've used all kinds of different kinds of microphones.
Right.
Don't get locked in on the microphones at first. Really get locked in on how do I get content out the door. So this is connected directly into my computer. There's not a lot of complication there. When we get done with the episode that we shoot on something called Riverside FM, the cool thing about Riverside, you guys, and we may be doing something differently down the road. But the cool thing about Riverside is when we're done shooting this, we have video, we have audio, and separate tracks. So every person has a separate track. It's not, okay, well, his audio was up here, my audio was down here, and we can't do anything about it afterwards. We have separate tracks that we could actually lower things, and everything kind of comes together the way we need to because it's giving what we need. We take this, we put it into an editing program. It doesn't have to be a complicated editing program. A lot of times we'll use like ScreenFlow or Camtasia to get the video edited. It's super, super simple overall. Then we'll take that video, we'll export the audio so that we've got a separate audio. We'll upload the video to things like YouTube, TikTok, things like that. So we spread it out. We use Canva to take the initial video, put clips, and then we've got social media content. We take the audio, we upload the audio to something called Anchor FM. And Anchor FM is a tool that is now owned by Spotify, which kind of makes it easy to upload. It's free, by the way. So upload your content into an area, and then it sort of gets pushed out to all the places that you want to get it pushed out, iTunes, Google Podcasts, things like that. And that's the big majority of what we're doing. Now, we use some very cool things to make our lives easier on top of that. Once I have a podcast go live on iTunes, what happens is I use a tool called NetEngine, and NetEngine automatically searches my podcast. It's pinging it like every hour. And if there's a new podcast that goes live, it pulls it to my website. So if you go to serialprogressseeker.com right now, that's a NetEngine site. And the podcast that comes up that's new, we don't have to go manually do that. It pulls all of the stuff from the podcast network and puts it there. Now, if we want to put show notes and things in, we can actually go edit that post and add those things. But the core of our episode, the audio, is already there and it's done. Now, the other cool thing is like, we're not doing this for our health. Obviously, we want to build a list. We want to send people into a funnel. And so one of the core ways that we get people into a funnel is something called Customer Engine. Customer Engine is we build our SMS list, we build our email list, and with those things, then we have the ability to reach out to our audience. So every time we have a podcast episode that we think, hey, this is a really good episode, we can send it out to the list and be like, hey, check this out. Let us know what you think. But also if we have an offer, something that we think is a good fit for our podcast people, we can send out a message and alert people that way. And that's where you take this very simple thing that we're doing, which is me and Marshall hanging out like we would be doing anyway. We click record, and this cycle of things happens after we get done recording that turns into a business that actually generates revenue. And now, is there a lot going on besides that? Yes, but that's the core tree. So that's the core of what we're doing.
Yeah, that's all really, really, it's incredible. Not only the tools that it takes to make it happen, but then how you then specifically transfer then into your tools to use from a marketing standpoint, and using the podcast as a real megaphone. We talk about megaphones all the time and how you have all these different marketing vehicles that you want to push. And we're using podcasting as one of our major ones right now. And that's really, really cool. So talk about, kind of your vision for, this specific podcast and how you plan to use this as a marketing tool in your business.
So one of the key things that we do is we've gotten incredibly good at helping experts, people that are already good at something, amplify what they're doing and get more customers all over the planet into their world. And so if I had to like boil down, the ethos, like the behind the scenes, what Serial Progress Seeker is all about, it's how do we take experts that are used to delivering value to people and making money in a one-on-one fashion, and we give them the ability to do it in a one-to-many fashion. And so the idea is we have courses and programs and tools that help people do that. That's great. We've got a large customer base that comes in, but if you're helping, people at the level that we are, and for the length of time that we have been, you start to realize that there's a lot of people that need that and don't have it yet. They don't have any of that background knowledge. They don't even know where to look. And so we need to reach a bigger audience. The trap that we got into for a long time, and this is like me talking about weaknesses in our business. The trap that we got into for a long time is the only way you could hear about some of this stuff that we were doing is to pay us. That was it. The only, you had to literally find a buy button, and sometimes we hide those buy buttons really good because we're so smart. But we hide those buy buttons, and that was a problem. I was like, we're not bringing in and really, we're not serving. Like, we're making good money. We're helping people. We're helping this core group of people, but like, we're not really serving the way that we could be. And I think that the base of any good business is are you actually serving the world? And it's like, how do we get something out there that, yes, is going to put people into our funnel? They're going to buy our courses because they're going to get to where they want to go 6 months, 12 months, 2-3 years faster than they would be without us. But how do you teach something that has a value to somebody that's just casually, they're not ready to buy a course. They're not ready to go in there, but how do you flip their minds? And you said Tim Ferriss earlier, and I think this is great. We were talking about the Tim Ferriss podcast. I remember the book from Tim Ferriss that changed my life, the 4-Hour Work Week. And I remember, did I buy that from Tim? Yeah, I bought that. Tim got money from me purchasing that book. Tim got more money down the road from me purchasing other things that he did. But that book fundamentally changed the course of my life forever. And that's the thing. The value that came to my life from that purchase, from going into some of his funnels and from being in a part of his world it's just huge. I can't even put a number on how valuable that was. There's been those kinds of people that have come into my life forever. But how did I initially get exposed to those people? And so the mission that we're really here is, I want this podcast to be something that, number one, we get to show people some things that maybe they didn't even know existed that they could do for their business, so that they can do better and they can be more free and they can have more money coming in and they can help more people in their business, because that's the idea. All of our businesses help people, right? But people that like have decided, I'm done with my job. I'm an expert at something, but I'm done in this way that I'm doing this. They have a way to go. The other thing, though, is we want to connect our audience with other people that are doing things just like us. I'm not so up my own ass to think that like I'm the end all be all. I'm definitely not. I think the idea is, with this medium and the way we do things, we have the ability to bring in people that are much smarter than me, are doing things much different than me. And the audience that listens to this and the audience that will be listening to it as we keep going, they get the advantage of our access, our window into the world. And so, yes, on one hand, it's a very selfish thing because, full disclosure, this absolutely is here to take every single one of you listening into a funnel that will help you, but absolutely
You're getting very sleepy.
Yeah, right. but 100% will benefit us financially. But at the other end, life can't just be about that. When you go to sleep at night, do you like yourself? When you look in the mirror every day, do you like yourself? And my vibe is, when I'm done here, when I'm done on this planet, did I go all out and do everything that I could do to, help people escape what they don't want to be a part of and get to the part of their life where they want to? And this is the vehicle. We realized that the way you and I work, this was a way that we could get our message out to as many people as possible. And by doing something we actually enjoy, which is hanging out and talking. And so, I feel very blessed that podcasting exists, because there's a level of ease in actually doing this. It doesn't feel hard for us to get on and talk. And for some reason, people actually like listening to it, and it grows our business, as well as, the people that we're hearing back from that listen to this podcast. It's growing their business too. It's helping them start their business. It's helping them to have the kind of business that they didn't even know existed before, which is something that they can do from a backpack, not to go back to our tagline, but that's really what we're hearing back from people is they're getting those tools. And so if I had to give them, an idea of why this medium is so important to us, all those things, but I think, right down to the core of it, it's because this is something that comes almost naturally to you and I, which is sitting around talking shit about stuff. And, I think that that's a key is, if you're going to do a podcast, you don't have to be great at it, but if you like talking about a subject, meaning like your family's like, oh my gosh, that's all you talk about. Oh my gosh, your friends are like, oh, I love that you're into that, but like,
right.
But here's the thing. Those are people around you. There are tons of people on the planet that are looking for you right now, and they want to talk about those things. They're just as nerdy or more than you, and they're looking for that group. And when you do this, you're really, not to quote Nirvana, but you're leading a tribe. You're building a tribe, and that's what it's all about. Is this podcasting thing? You really are creating a world for people that are into the same things as you to come and feel comfortable and to learn and to share. And that's what it's all about. That's why we decided, hey, this is important and we're going to go all in on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you couldn't have closed it down any better right there. I think it was just absolutely perfect as far as really pointing to the reason what we're doing. Obviously there's a marketing aspect behind it, but there's a real soul behind it too. And I think that's really important to make sure to share that and bear that. And essentially I'm just going to tell you right now, it's pretty easy to me to be able to see that what you're putting together here is essentially the new Microsoft, right? I mean, that's what we're going to be. We're literally out there. We're eating our own dog food, literally on the daily, and the genuine nature at which we're doing it to me is really, really obvious, and it's very, very refreshing and cool to be a part of.
Well, and I'll leave with this too. When it's all said and done, and we've built what we've got to build. Obviously, we've helped the people that we've helped, and that's the mission. I think it's incredibly cool to have an archive of that all the way through, and to be able to go back and see this is where it was here, and this is where it was here. Not only is this a way for us to teach and to get out the things that we know to people that can benefit from them, but it's a way for us to have a diary of this process that we went through all the way through. And so I look forward to 1,000, 2,000 episodes into this, as to really seeing, what the process was and having a documentation. And I think there's value in that for anybody that's playing along with us at home and is a part of our tribe. It's going to be interesting. So yeah, I love it. I love this medium. I think that, anybody that's out there that's building a business and wants to go faster, look into a podcast. You're going to suck at it at first. You're going to suck at it for a while, but it's still going to have a lot of value to you and to the people that are listening. So there you go.